This is the second part to Chapter 3, Consonants. We're going to talk about affricates. Affricate means a shorter than a sequence of two segments. They have a closing or a closure and then a release also. English affricates, like the voiceless ch and the voiced j, are affricates. Affricates are obstruents and can be devoiced both word initially and word finally. If you think about the word judge, so they can be voiced or voiceless, judge. So we're going to use that diacritic mark for the voicing. Fricatives are produced with the tongue close to, but not touching the passive articulators. The fricatives are obstruents and may be devoiced word initial or word final. So vain, then, runs. So runs, the z is devoiced a little bit, rouge. And so you have the devoicing, a little bit of devoicing on it. I'm trying to say them clearly, so when we say them in conversational speech, we actually do drop some of those sounds, or that voicing. The distribution of j, word initial or word final, like leisure, treasure, beige, garage. It can be used in any of those positions. You have word initial or word medial. That's the only place you find them. Happy, hold, behave. So you find happy is in the initial position and behave, the is in the middle position. Elision of affricates. When you are, elision means deletion of sound, or, so when we look at kind of, sometimes we don't say of, we actually devoice it, kind of. We put an F there instead of it, and we just barely touch it. Think about clothes. We actually don't usually say clothes, and we actually leave that off. Months, we do the same thing. I told him. You actually don't say the in the him very accurately when you're saying it in conversational speech. I could have, or could have been. We usually don't say the very clearly. Could have, and we do the v very briefly and silently. Could have been. When you say it faster, you realize that we don't tend to say those sounds. Then we also, in conversational speech, palatalize fricatives. So let's talk about the palatalization. We have the s and the z sound. In miss you, sometimes we say it, miss you. I miss you. You actually do palatalize the fricative, and it becomes more of a sh instead of a s. Was yellow. You do the same thing. You actually change it, and it becomes a zh instead of a s. Was yellow. You actually change it and palatalize the fricative. So we're going to talk about obstruents and sonorants. Some of the constriction in the vocal tract leading to the restricted airflow is an obstruent because we're obstructing the production. Sonorants, you have no constriction, all are voiced. Nasals, stops, are sonorants. There's a distribution of velar nasals, like the ng sound. There's no word initial in the English language of ng. It's always a word final, and it tends to follow vowels. For example, in singing or wing, you have that n velar nasal. Nasals can be syllabic. So when you are doing that with diacritic marks, you actually put a little comma or a dash underneath the nasal when that happens. So mitten, so that nasal becomes a syllable. Mitten. I mean, if I'm saying it correctly, you actually use the N. But mitten, it becomes a syllable in itself. And because it's syllabalized, you put the diacritic mark under the N. Let's talk about bottom. You do the same thing. You don't go bottom, you actually go bottom, and the becomes its own syllable. Homorganic nasals, you can have bilabial to labiodental, like to before labiodental. So symphony, you actually change that and it becomes more labiodental. If you have I'm valiant, the in that sound also becomes closer. It's not really a true labial, it becomes labiodental. The same thing can happen for alveolars to bilabials, alveolars to dentals, and alveolars to velars. So here's some example. For an alveolar to bilabial, the N becomes an M before bilabials. So in progress, you actually say more of an N instead of an M. Or, I'm sorry, I have that backwards. You say an M more than an N. In progress. So it becomes a bilabial. Alveolars to dentals. Tenth. You can see that it changes from alveolar and your tongue moves up to make it a dental. Alveolar to velar, you have 10 guppies. Because that's the G, you actually go all the way back and it becomes an ng sound instead of a N sound. So those are some changes that make when there's sounds that are close together. Liquids, we have lateral and rhotic sounds, the ul and the So some obstruction in the oral tract, but the air flows freely. There's no turbulence when you say ul or It actually sounds a little bit more like a sonorant than an obstruent. The liquids can be devoiced after voiceless stops. So play, clay, tree, cream, all of those, they become devoiced instead of actually turning your voice on. Your voice doesn't come on until you say the vowel. Liquids can also be syllabic. Excuse me. Bottle. That's how you would say it correctly, but most of the time we don't say bottle. We say bottle, and the ul becomes its own syllable. The same thing with middle. It has its own syllable. You also have light and dark L's in your production. The light or the clear L occurs word initial and word medial before a vowel. So light and pilot. There's no diacritic for light. They're actually because it's light and clear. When it's dark, it occurs after a vowel, before a consonant, or when the L syllable is syllabic, like in tile, field, bottle. You can see that it becomes a dark sound. It sounds a little more swallowed. Let's talk about the diacritic mark that you use for that is a tilde through the middle of the L. How we put that on the computer, we're going to have to figure that out. So lute versus tool. Lute, tool. The ul becomes a little bit darker and it's a little more swallowed. Lean versus kneel. Let versus tell. Leap versus peel. Do you hear the difference in those? When you do a broad transcription, you don't use any diacritic marks. When you do a narrow transcription, you use your diacritic marks. We're going to talk now about glides, and that's our final topic. They're semi-vowels. There's no obstruction in the oral tract, and there's two glides in English. The palatal j, and the labial velar w. Actually, the palatal y. I wanted to make sure that I said that right. And the labial velar w. Those are glides. The glide variations are produced higher before high vowels. Yeast and weed, they actually produce higher in the mouth before you have high vowels. Glides are produced lower than low vowels in yacht and wad. They're produced very low in the mouth. W is more rounded before round vowels. Woo and woe, the W becomes very rounded. You can watch your lips. And glides can be devoiced after voiceless stops. Pure, cute, quick, twin. You noticed your voice doesn't turn on until the vowel happens. And you can put the diacritic mark of the little circle above those when they're devoiced.